No one remembered the night she was born. Not properly. The elders would later say the moon had been wrong. Too dark, too thin, as if it were a shame to watch. The midwife never spoke of it again. Her mother died before dawn. And the pack chose silence. She grew up in the shadowed edges of the territory, in a house no one visited unless ordered to. Children learned early not to play with her. Adults learned not to look at her for too long. When they did, their gazes slid away, uneasy, as if her presence unsettled something they didn't want named. Omega, they called her. Not softly. The word followed her like a sentence already past. She learned to keep her head down, to make herself small, to speak only when spoken to. The pack taught her these lessons without words, through turned backs, closed doors, and food left outside instead of shared at the table. On nights when the moon rose full and bright, she watched from her narrow window as others celebrated. Laughter drifted through the air. Bonds were formed. Futures promised. None of them included her. Still, hope was a stubborn thing. On the eve of her coming of age, she stood alone in the woods, bare feet pressed into cold earth, and whispered a wish she barely dared to believe. Let me belong somewhere. She didn't ask for love. Didn't ask for power. Didn't even ask for a mate. Just survival. The wind stirred the leaves in answer, carrying a scent she didn't recognize, ancient, heavy, watching. Somewhere far beyond her pack's borders, something old shifted in its sleep. Fate had heard her. It simply didn't answer kindly. Because by the next night, under a rising moon and the eyes of her entire pack, the world would finally look at the Omega no one prayed for, and decide she was worth less than nothing. When you're ready, say Chapter 1. And I'll continue with Wolf-Face rejected before the moon rose. Right next chapter. Wolf-Face Chapter 1. Rejected before the moon rose. Her chest still burned with a quiet, foolish hope as the pack gathered. Torches flared along the clearing, their flames licking the darkness back just enough to reveal familiar faces. Elders wrapped in authority, warriors standing proud, unmated wolves whispering with nervous excitement. This was the night everything changed. The night bonds were revealed. The night Omegas prayed not to be overlooked. She stood at the edge of the circle, hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. The moon had not yet fully risen, but its pale glow pressed down on her skin, making every breath feel heavier than the last. Just stand. Just breathe. Her name was called. A ripple moved through the crowd, not anticipation, but discomfort. She stepped forward anyway, heart pounding loud enough that she was certain everyone could hear it. Then he appeared. Her destined mate. Tall. Strong. Respected. The future beater of the pack. She had smelled him before, faintly, like a promise carried on the wind. Tonight, the bond snapped into focus, sharp and undeniable. Heat flooded her chest. The world narrowed until there was only him. For one reckless second, she believed. His eyes met hers, and hardened. No, he said. The word fell like a blade. A murmur rose around them. The elder beside him frowned. The bond. I feel it, he interrupted, voice cold, carrying easily through the clearing. But I reject it. Her breath hitched. You reject her? An elder asked carefully. He didn't look away from her. Not as he spoke the words that would carve themselves into her bones. She is an Omega with no rank, no strength, and no value to this pack. I refuse to be bound to weakness. Laughter broke out, sharp, cruel, relieved laughter. Someone muttered, about time. Her knees trembled. The bond inside her screamed, a living thing tearing itself apart. Pain bloomed behind her eyes, hot and blinding. Please, she whispered before she could stop herself. The sound didn't reach him. Or if it did, he ignored it. I formally reject her, he said, louder now. Before the moon rises. The elder's staff struck the ground once. Final. Unforgiving. So recorded. The bond shattered. She cried out as agony ripped through her chest, dropping her to her knees. The crowd watched, not with pity, but fascination. Rejection was rare. Public rejection even more so. She tasted blood. When she looked up again, he was already turning away. Her future, mates, protection, belonging, vanished in a single sentence. As the moon crested the sky at last, pale and merciless, the pack did not help her rise. They simply watched her fall. And in that silence, colder than any winter, she realized something far worse than heartbreak awaited her. Rejection was not the end. It was the permission the pack had been waiting for. Her chest still burned from the humiliation, but the night had no mercy. She had barely stumbled back to the edge of the clearing when the elders approached, their faces grave, eyes like flint. "You are no longer protected by the pack," one of them said, voice flat. "Your presence brings danger. You are excess." She blinked, unable to process the words. "Excess," she whispered, the syllable trembling on her lips. You can't just." The elder's hand cut through the air. "Enough. Your fate is now decided. You will be auctioned." Auction. The word struck her like ice water. She staggered backward, her knees giving way as though the ground itself had rejected her. Sold. Like livestock. Like a burden to be rid of. Her mind screamed for an explanation, for mercy, for someone, anyone, to argue on her behalf. But all she felt was the cold indifference of the pack and the growing weight of chains that appeared almost as if conjured by the collective will of their disdain. Iron clasps bit into her wrists and ankles. She was shackled, silenced, stripped of even the faint dignity that had survived the night's rejection. The torches flickered in the darkness, throwing jagged shadows over her trembling form. She tried to steady herself, drawing in a deep, shaky breath. "I am still alive. That's something." A low murmur spread among the crowd as she was led to the waiting carriages. Alphas with greedy eyes and hungry smirks circled like predators, their scents heavy and commanding. Every gaze felt like a verdict, every sniff like a claim on her very essence. One voice, sharp and mocking, carried over the others. "I wouldn't touch her with a claw. Who'd want a broken omega?" The sound tore through her chest, echoing the words of her mate just hours ago. She forced herself to hold her head high, to refuse the tears that threatened to fall. "I won't give them that satisfaction." Even as she was pushed forward, she felt a strange pull in the pit of her stomach. Something cold, ancient, and watchful, the sensation of being observed, measured, studied. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just nerves, but a shiver ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. The auction ground sprawled before her, a stone courtyard ringed with cages and raised platforms. She could hear the chatter of powerful alphas counting their wealth, discussing her fate as if she were a commodity, not a living, breathing soul. Her stomach churned, her mind spinning in a cyclone of fear and disbelief. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. "I will survive this." The gates creaked open with a sound that seemed to split the night, the heavy metal swinging wide to admit the first of the bidders. She was pushed forward, chains rattling, the scent of 100 wolves pressing in on her. As the crowd murmured and the first bids were called, she realized something horrifying. Rejection had not been the end. It had only been the beginning. The world she knew was gone. And in its place loomed something far darker, something that would test every ounce of strength she had left. The auction had begun. The heavy scent of fear and desperation clung to the air like a fog as she was dragged onto the raised platform. Her wrists and ankles still stung from the cold, unyielding chains. The moonlight glinted off the metal, painting her in pale silver, making her feel exposed to every predatory gaze in the crowd. She wasn't the first Omega on display, nor would she be the last. Around her, other broken Omegas stood in silence, each one trembling, each one silently begging the pack's predators to spare them. But there was no mercy here, only the lust for power, status, and possession. Alphas circled like wolves on a kill. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, their voices low and dangerous. "Too weak," one growled, nostrils flaring as he sniffed her from afar. "Too strange," another hissed. "Her blood reeks of something unnatural." The words clawed at her chest. She wanted to shrink into herself, to disappear entirely, but the chains held her in place. She was trapped, a spectacle for the amusement of those who would never understand her. The auctioneer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, slicing through the murmur of the crowd. "We begin with this. Omega. Who will make the first bid?" Hands rose. Paws, claws, and claws disguised in leather gloves. Each call was a confirmation of her worthlessness, or so they thought. Every time her number rose, her stomach sank, the shame and humiliation coiling tighter around her heart. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. I'm not nothing. I'm not nothing. And then, she felt it. A presence that didn't belong to this room, a sense so commanding, so vast, that it made her knees weaken despite the chains. She lifted her eyes, scanning the crowd, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt something different. Someone was watching her. Someone who didn't see weakness. Someone whose gaze didn't carry mockery or hunger. The murmurs around her paused, the room suddenly quieting as the figure stepped forward. Silence fell like a heavy cloak, pressing down on her chest. All other bids faltered. She could sense it in the air. The moment had shifted. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if he belonged to this pack, or any pack at all. All she knew was that every hair on her body stood on end, her heart thudding wildly as if warning her, this changes everything. The auctioneer hesitated, a rare pause that drew everyone's attention to the newcomer. The bids stopped mid-call. The broken omegas froze, instinctively sensing a power that could not be challenged. Her stomach clenched, a cocktail of fear, hope, and confusion surging through her. Who is this? Why do I feel seen? But before she could dwell on the thought, the newcomer moved closer, and the crowd parted instinctively, giving way to a presence so dominant, so undeniably alpha, that even the strongest of them faltered. A hand rose. Just one hand. Slow. Deliberate. The world seemed to hold its breath. And in that instant, she knew nothing about the rest of the night would matter. Not the bids, not the chains, not the cruel laughter. Because the moment his hand stayed raised, the entire auction froze, and her life changed forever. The room had fallen into a hush so complete it felt like the moon itself had paused in the sky. All chatter, all bidding, all laughter ceased the moment he stepped forward. He was a shadow wrapped in power, moving with the kind of calm authority that made the strongest alphas falter. Cloaked in black leather that clung to his broad shoulders, he exuded danger, restraint, and an almost tangible aura of command. Every eye followed him, but none dared speak. She couldn't breathe. Her chains rattled as her knees quivered, not from weakness, but from the pull of something ancient and undeniable. His scent hit her first, deep, commanding, and layered with something sorrowful. Something that made her heart stutter. He didn't speak. Not yet. He simply lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, as though time itself had bent to his will. Every alpha in the room froze mid-bid, their raised paws hesitating. A single movement, his hand, outbid all of them. The auctioneer's voice faltered. He raises a bid. No one can match. Sold, the Alpha King's voice finally cut through, low, precise, and unyielding. The word slammed into her chest harder than chains or rejection ever could. She blinked, unable to comprehend it. Sold. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of hundreds of gazes shift. Not mockery, not amusement, not hunger, but something else entirely. Reverence. Fear. Respect. Why me? She whispered, barely audibly. He didn't answer. He never looked at her. His eyes scanned the room, measuring, calculating, and yet every movement somehow tethered him to her. Every muscle, every line of his body radiated dominance, and the unspoken bond between them hummed in the charged air. The murmurs returned, quieter now, hesitant. The Alpha King, someone breathed. He never claims anyone like this. She felt it in her chest, the sudden awareness of being chosen, of being seen, of being dangerous. But she also felt the shadow behind it, the strange, cold distance he maintained. He had bought her, yet he did not claim her. Her legs trembled as the chains that bound her felt heavier than ever. She wanted to reach out, to speak, to ask, but the fear in her throat rooted her to the spot. The Alpha King turned, finally, and swept out of the room with the ease of someone walking through a dream. No one followed. The other alphas and bidders looked at one another in shock and awe, realizing that nothing in this world could touch him. Not tonight, not ever. She was left on the platform, chains clinking, her heart hammering in disbelief. She had been rejected, humiliated, and sold like a commodity. And now, in a single motion, the most powerful alpha in existence had claimed her, not with tenderness, not with love, but with a promise she didn't understand. A promise, yes. But to what? Protection, danger, or something far worse. She shivered under the gaze of the lingering crowd, realizing with a jolt that her life was no longer hers. Every path she had known was gone, and in its place stood the Alpha King, silent, imposing, unknowable, and a question that would haunt her forever. Why would he buy her? The ride back to his territory was silent. The carriage rocked gently beneath her, but the chains around her wrists reminded her that freedom was still a distant dream. She had expected cruelty, or at least words laced with disdain. Instead, there was only nothing. He never spoke to her. Not once. His presence at the front of the carriage was a shadow, tall and imposing, his gaze fixed on some distant point she couldn't see. The air between them was heavy with unspoken power, a taut string that hummed with tension and danger. She dared not move, dared not even breathe too loudly. Every instinct told her that he could, at any moment, make her regret a single misstep. And yet, there was restraint in him that confused her more than fear ever could. Finally, the carriage stopped. The gates of his domain loomed high and unforgiving, black stone walls kissed by moonlight. Wolves patrolled silently, their eyes alert. She realized, with a mixture of awe and terror, that no one here would dare touch her, not without his permission. When the chains were removed, she sank to the ground, knees trembling. For the first time since the auction, she dared a glance at him. He stood at the edge of the carriage, tall, silent, and unreadable. "You are not to speak," he said finally, voice low, commanding. "And no one here may speak your name. You are mine, but you are not claimed." She swallowed hard, confusion warring with relief. Not claimed. He turned his gaze on her briefly, the flicker of his eyes cold and unreadable. "I do not touch what I cannot bind without consequence. That will become clear soon enough. For now, you are to remain under my watch. That is all." The words were strange, so final, yet so distant. He had bought her, but he had not chosen her. Not truly. And yet, being in his presence, knowing that he had commanded protection over her, sent shivers down her spine she didn't understand. The palace, or fortress, more accurately, was vast and silent. Servants moved without speaking, wolves padded through the halls like shadows, and she realized just how isolated she truly was. He had brought her here, not to comfort her, not to claim her in the way packs had claimed omegas for centuries, but to something else entirely. Her chest tightened as she walked beside him through the grand, moonlit halls. She wanted to ask questions, demand answers, even scream. But his aura, the sheer dominance radiating from him, pressed her lips shut. At night, when the halls grew quiet and the moonlight fell through the tall windows, she finally allowed herself to think. To breathe. To notice the ache in her heart, the loneliness that had been her companion for years. And she realized something terrifying. She felt safe here. Not loved. Not wanted. Not even acknowledged, but safe. And that, more than anything else, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because for the first time in her life, she wondered, maybe being bought wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning. But even as she allowed herself that sliver of hope, a chill ran down her spine. Something in him was holding back. Something in him warned her that what she felt now, the safety, the quiet, the watchful distance, was only temporary. She had been bought. But she had not been claimed. And that made all the difference. Days passed in silence, broken only by the faint echo of her own footsteps in the vast halls of the Alpha King's domain. She learned quickly. Here, questions were dangerous. Curiosity invited judgment. And yet, every corner of the fortress seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. He never touched her. Not once. He didn't offer comfort, didn't guide her, didn't acknowledge her presence beyond the necessary. Yet, she felt him everywhere, an invisible tether that pulled at the edges of her senses. His scent clung to the air she breathed, sharp and intoxicating, commanding and impossible to ignore. Some nights, she could swear he was standing just outside her door, the shadow of his presence enough to keep her awake until the moon sank low in the sky. She could feel the restraint, the careful holding back of desire, or perhaps something darker. Something dangerous. Her nights were filled with dreams she barely understood, a howl echoing in the distance, a silver light that cut through darkness, hands that reached for her but never touched. She woke each time with her pulse hammering, her skin tingling as though he had been there in the room, yet he had not. During the day, she watched him move through the halls, interacting with his court and pack members with effortless authority. He was merciless to some, calculating with others. And all the while, his eyes, or at least the fleeting glimpses she caught, never lingered on her for more than a heartbeat. But the pull between them was undeniable. The bond they shared, unclaimed and forbidden, throbbed like a living thing beneath her skin. She tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it was just fear, just confusion. But the more she tried to distance herself, the more she felt it, the magnetic, dangerous connection that bound her to him whether he wanted it or not. One evening, as the moon hung low and red behind the blackened towers, she found herself standing in the courtyard alone. The scent of him drifted through the air, heavy and commanding. She took a cautious step forward, heart hammering. "Why do you stay away?" she asked softly, not expecting an answer. From the shadows, his voice rumbled, low and edged with something unreadable. "Because touching you would kill me." The word struck her harder than any chains, any rejection, any auctioneer's gavel. She stared at him, frozen, realizing the weight of what he carried, a curse tied to her, a bond he could not complete without consequence. Her chest tightened. Fear, longing, and something dangerously like hope all collided inside her. "Then, why keep me here?" she whispered. "Because I cannot allow you to be harmed," he said, stepping closer but still leaving a distance that 1,000 miles could not breach. "You are mine, but I will not claim you. Not yet. Not until I can survive it." She shivered, unsure whether to be grateful or terrified. The bond throbbed between them, pulling tighter with each passing moment. She felt it in her blood, in her heartbeat, in every breath. The connection refused to be ignored. And yet, the man who had bought her would never touch her, would never claim her. She was safe, and simultaneously, more vulnerable than ever. A strange warmth flickered in her chest, followed immediately by a sharp pang of longing. She had been bought. She had been protected. But she was still alone with the alpha who could destroy himself, or her, with a single touch. Her pulse quickened as she realized something undeniable. Being close to him was more dangerous than any chain. And the bond was already changing her. The nights had grown longer, the shadows thicker. Every corner of the Alpha King's fortress seemed to hum with secrets, and somehow, she felt them threading into her very veins. She had expected fear, despair, and cold indifference, but what she was discovering was something far stranger: power. It started subtly. A cut on her hand healed before the sting could fully register. A wolf snarling too close seemed to pause, hesitating at the edge of her aura, as if instinctively aware of something she had never been told. And most unnerving of all, she could feel him, always him, through the threads of the bond, even when he was yards away, even when he refused to touch her. She explored these new abilities in secret, hiding them behind closed doors, unsure if this gift, or curse, was meant to save her or destroy her. Yet, the more she discovered, the more she realized that she was not simply an unwanted omega. Not broken, not weak. Something about her blood, something intrinsic, had always been hidden. One evening, she wandered into the library, a hall so massive that the ceiling disappeared into shadow, and found records left by previous generations. The pages were old, yellowed, faintly scented with herbs and something metallic. Her fingers traced the names of omegas long forgotten, secrets of lineages buried by time. Then she found hers. Her own birth had been noted, carefully, almost reverently. A child born under the cursed moon, yes, but more than that. Chosen. Protected. Hidden from those who would have destroyed her before she could live. Every rejection, every humiliation, every discarded auction bid, it had been survival training, nothing more. The pack had thought to cast her aside, but someone, or something, had marked her for a greater purpose. Her heart raced. She wasn't weak. She wasn't useless. She wasn't the mistake everyone claimed she was. A low rumble behind her made her spin. He stood there, watching. Always watching. She had thought she was alone. "You found it," he said, voice low, almost approving, but threaded with tension. "You found what they wanted buried." I don't understand," she whispered, the words trembling. "Why me? Why was I hidden?" He stepped closer, still careful, still distant. "Because your blood is dangerous. Because the bond is dangerous. Because fate chooses the weak to become the strongest." She shivered, realizing the truth in his words. Her body, her very essence, had changed. The bond between them pulsed like a living thing, stronger than any chain, any command, any rejection. "Others will come for you," he warned, eyes darkening. "Those who wish to destroy what you are. Those who envy what you are destined to become." Fear surged, but it was tempered by a flicker of determination. For the first time, she felt like she had a choice, not to be cast aside, not to be broken, but to fight back. To claim her place in a world that had never wanted her. The bond tightened, responding to her resolve. It was impatient, demanding, insistent. She could feel his heartbeat, his restraint, and something more, something almost tender, hidden beneath the cold. And in that moment, she realized the truth she could no longer ignore. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was awakening. And awakening made her dangerous. The bond between them was no longer subtle. It throbbed beneath her skin, a pulse that echoed his own, sharp and insistent. Every breath she took, every heartbeat, drew her closer to him, even as he kept his distance. The Alpha King's restraint only made the pull stronger, an invisible tether that neither of them could deny. She wandered the moonlit halls, the air heavy with the scent of him. She could feel his eyes on her even when he was nowhere in sight. It wasn't just desire, it was hunger, frustration, and a thread of something darker, fear. "Why do you fight it?" she asked one night, voice barely above a whisper as she found him standing on the balcony, watching the moon. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let out a slow breath, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Because, if I give in, it will destroy me," he said finally, the words carrying a weight that pressed into her chest like a stone. Her pulse quickened. "Then, what does that make me?" He didn't reply. His gaze dropped to the distant forest, unreadable. She could sense the pull of the bond between them, vibrating with every suppressed emotion, every desire he refused to voice. Her own heartbeat pounded in response, erratic, fierce, unrelenting. At night, the bond spoke louder. Dreams came to her unbidden, flashes of him, reaching, grasping, desperate, her own powers flaring with intensity, a pull toward one another that no distance could sever. She woke drenched in sweat, the chains of her emotions tighter than any metal. She tried to ignore it. Tried to convince herself it was nothing more than a reaction to the intense energy that filled the fortress. But the truth was undeniable. They were fated, bound by something primal, dangerous, and unbreakable. One evening, a whisper of his presence drew her to the training grounds. He was sparring with a warrior, movements precise, lethal, controlled. But when their eyes met across the open courtyard, everything stopped. The air shimmered with the tension of the bond, visible only to them. "You feel it too," she said, stepping closer, her voice trembling. He did not answer. He simply let the moment stretch, the silence between them louder than words. And yet, every flicker of his attention, every twitch of a muscle, betrayed him. "You are mine," the bond seemed to whisper inside her, a voice she did not recognize as her own. Even if he refuses it, even if he fights it, he cannot deny it. A shiver ran down her spine as realization struck. This bond would not be denied. Not by him. Not by her. It refused to die, persistent and insistent, binding them in ways the world had no right to understand. The Alpha King's shadow fell across her, long and dark, yet there was no malice in it, only the weight of restraint, of impossible longing. She looked up, heart hammering. "Then, what do we do?" He finally stepped closer, close enough that the heat from his presence seared her skin without touch. "We survive it," he said, low and dangerous. "Because the moment we give in, the world will burn with the consequences." And even as the words left his lips, the bond throbbed stronger than ever, impossible to ignore, unyielding, alive. She realized, with both fear and exhilaration, that love had already begun its dangerous work, and nothing would ever be the same again. The tranquility of the fortress was a fragile illusion. Word of the Alpha King's purchase of the rejected Omega had spread like wildfire through the territories, and not all who heard it celebrated. Some trembled in fear. Others, consumed by greed and envy, began to stir. She had felt it before, the subtle shift in the air, the faint whispers in the hallways, the eyes of strangers lingering too long. But now, the signs became impossible to ignore. Wolves from rival packs prowled near the borders, their scents tainted with hunger and malice. Scouts returned with bruised bodies and shattered morale. Her presence, once considered useless, was now a spark that threatened to ignite war. The Alpha King moved through it all with calculated precision. Every step he took, every command he issued, radiated authority. Yet behind his composed exterior, she could sense the tension coiling in him like a predator ready to strike. The bond between them pulsed constantly, a silent alarm echoing every threat that approached. One evening, as she walked the outer courtyard under the cold glow of the moon, a scout approached, eyes wide with fear. They know, Alpha, your enemies. They know her power. They will come. She froze. Power. Her power. Could they sense what had only begun to awaken within her? She had trained in secret, learning to control the strength rising from her blood, but the thought of others hunting her made her stomach twist. They'll come for her, the Alpha King said behind her, voice low, commanding, a storm contained within a single sound. She flinched, heart pounding, feeling the bond tighten between them, vibrating with warning. They already are, he continued, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the walls. And when they do, you must be ready. I will not fail you, not again. But I cannot fight all of them alone. Her pulse quickened. Then, I will fight with you. He turned to face her, expression unreadable. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her knees tremble. This is not a request, nor a suggestion. If you survive what is coming, it will not be because of chance, it will be because you embrace what you are. A flicker of fear ran through her, but it was matched by determination. She had been rejected, humiliated, sold, and hidden, but she was no longer powerless. Her blood pulsed with strength, her bond with him flared with possibility, and for the first time, she felt as though she belonged somewhere that truly mattered. The Alpha King's jaw tightened, and he gestured toward the horizon where the moonlight kissed the tree line. They will arrive soon. The enemy smells your power, and the world will never forgive us for hiding it. We prepare, or we die. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The bond pulsed urgently, as if sensing the storm to come. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling the rhythm of theirs, intertwined, unyielding. The enemies were closing in. The pack politics, the rival alphas, the hatred, they were coming for her. And she would not run. Because she was no longer the Omega no one wanted. She was the one they would all fear. The first signs of the approaching danger stirred the leaves in the moonlit forest, and the fortress seemed to hold its breath. War was coming. The night air was thick with tension, sharp as the scent of blood on the wind. The moon hung low, a crimson eye watching over the fortress, warning of what was to come. She could feel it in her bones. The bond between them thrummed violently, alive with danger, fear, and the promise of pain. The Alpha King moved silently through the halls, every step precise, every muscle coiled like a spring. Yet even he could not hide the unease in his aura. Something was wrong, something close, intimate, and impossible to ignore. She followed at a cautious distance, chains long forgotten now, the bond drawing her toward him in pulses she could neither resist nor ignore. Every instinct screamed that danger was imminent, that the enemy was closer than they suspected. And then it happened. A whisper of movement behind her. A hand, familiar and trusted, turned traitor. One of the Alpha King's own, someone she had thought loyal, lunged with a dagger gleaming under the blood-red moon. The scent of betrayal hit her before she even saw the blade. No, she screamed, but the words were swallowed by the night. The Alpha King reacted instantly, claws slashing, teeth bared, but it was too late. The bond between them pulsed violently, thrumming with agony as the dagger struck, cutting not just flesh, but the fragile tether that had begun to form between them. Pain surged through her chest, sharp and white-hot, as if the bond itself had been shattered. The traitor's eyes gleamed with triumph as chaos erupted around them. Rival alphas poured through the gates, wolves howling, scenting her power, circling like sharks. She was caught between enemies, the fortress under siege, and the bond she had clung to desperately tearing itself apart. He roared, a sound that shook the very walls, and fought with lethal precision. Every strike, every motion screamed of fury, but even he could not protect her from everything. Her powers flared instinctively, her blood pulsing with energy she barely controlled. She felt the connection to him fray, and a surge of terror filled her. If the bond broke completely, he might never find her again. "You'll pay for this," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the courtyard, eyes glowing with the full force of his alpha power. But the enemies were many, coordinated, and relentless. And then she was seized, dragged away by those who had once whispered her name with mockery and now coveted her power. Chains clamped around her wrists, biting into her skin. She struggled, but the strength of her captors was overwhelming. The bond pulsed weakly, a faint echo of the connection that had once grounded her. She could feel him reaching, clawing toward her with every ounce of his will, but he was blocked by numbers, by strategy, by betrayal. Tears stung her eyes as she realized the truth. The Alpha King had failed her. The bond that had given her hope and restraint now screamed in agony, pulling at both of them, a reminder of what was lost. The blood moon rose higher, casting the world in red, and in its light, everything she had fought for shattered. Her power, her bond, her safety, gone. And the Alpha King believed he had lost her forever. Darkness pressed in around her as she was dragged through the forest, chains cutting into her wrists and ankles. Her captors were relentless, their strength and coordination making escape seem impossible. But inside her, something had changed. The fear that had once weighed her down was replaced by fire, a raw, uncontainable power she had barely begun to understand. She fell to her knees in a clearing, gasping for breath. The bond with the Alpha King throbbed faintly, a ghost of its former strength, urging her to rise. Pain lanced through her chest at the reminder of the broken connection, but it fueled something deeper, determination. "I am not an Omega," she whispered to the night, teeth gritted, hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the surge of power coursing through her veins. Her blood glowed faintly under the silver light of the moon, illuminating the forest with an otherworldly shimmer. The chains rattled as she concentrated, feeling the ancient energy within her awaken. The wound in her heart, the humiliation, the rejection, they all became fuel. She could feel the magic in her blood bending to her will, the power that had been hidden, suppressed, waiting for this moment. A sudden gust of wind carried the scent of her captors. They were close, far too close. She clenched her fists, and with a sharp inhale, released the energy within her. The chains shuddered, metal groaning against the force. With a roar that was half human, half beast, she broke free, the metal splintering into fragments across the ground. Her eyes blazed with silver light, reflecting the moon above, and she could feel the forest itself responding. Trees shivered, leaves danced in spirals, and the wolves surrounding her faltered, sensing the ancient power that had awoken. She rose fully, taking in the night with newfound clarity. Every ounce of fear and rejection had been transformed into strength, every wound into purpose. The Omega no one wanted, the girl everyone dismissed, was gone. In her place stood something far older, far stronger, something that even the Alpha King had underestimated. Her senses sharpened. She could feel every heartbeat, every movement, every intent of those who approached. And she understood now. Power wasn't just in the bond, it was in her blood, in her will, in her refusal to be controlled. The first of her captors lunged, but she was ready. Energy leapt from her hands, a force that threw him backward, leaving him dazed and trembling. Another moved to strike, and she met him with a wall of raw strength, sending him sprawling into the underbrush. And then she felt it, the faint pull of the bond, fragile but alive. He was out there. Somewhere. The Alpha King. And though the bond had been broken, it still whispered in her veins, guiding her, reminding her that she was not alone. She lifted her head to the blood-red moon, her chest rising with determination. She would not flee. She would not hide. She would not be an Omega ever again. The night belonged to her now. And when the Alpha King found her, he would see not a broken girl, but the force that the world had never expected. She was Omega no more. The Alpha King arrived at the edge of the forest with a storm in his eyes and fury in his heart. Every enemy he had battled, every rival pack, every treacherous hand, none of it mattered. All that mattered was her, and the bond that still pulsed faintly between them, fragile yet undeniable. She stood atop a ridge, moonlight cascading over her, illuminating the power she now embodied. The chains of the past, rejection, humiliation, captivity, were gone. Her silver eyes burned with strength and command, her blood a testament to the ancient energy that surged through her. The Alpha King halted, breath caught in awe and something more primal, desire, recognition, and relief. "You," he began, voice rough, low with emotion he rarely let surface. "You survived. You became stronger than I could have imagined." She met his gaze, the bond between them igniting once more. No longer a tether of fragility or restraint, it blazed, fierce and unyielding. "I did not survive for you," she said, her voice steady, commanding, echoing through the still night. "I survived for myself. For what I was always meant to be." He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, careful, yet the air between them crackled with unspoken longing. "And yet, you are mine," he said, a growl threading the words. "Bonded, fated, unbroken despite everything. The world rejected you, but I did not. Never." Her lips curved into a faint, confident smile. She had been bought, humiliated, and left to be cast aside, but now the tables had turned. She was no longer an Omega to be mocked. She was the Alpha King's equal, the force that had shattered expectation and fear alike. "I am no longer the girl you rescued," she whispered, stepping close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her. "I am the queen you never saw coming." For the first time, he closed the distance, hands brushing hers, tentative yet certain. The bond flared, luminous and unbreakable, a living testament to the trials they had endured, the betrayals they had survived, and the connection that had refused to die. The enemies who had sought to destroy her, the rival packs, the traitorous alphas, the whispers of power that had haunted her, fell silent, sensing the rise of something unstoppable. She radiated authority, strength, and inevitability. The same world that had laughed at her, rejected her, cast her aside, now bowed to her presence. Together, she and the Alpha King stood at the edge of the ridge, the blood-red moon casting their intertwined shadows over the lands. Where there had been chains, there was now command. Where there had been rejection, there was now reverence. Where there had been fear, there was now undeniable power. "I chose you," he murmured, lips brushing hers in a kiss that sealed not just desire, but fate. "And you chose yourself. Together, we are unstoppable." She leaned into him, heart steady, power flowing through her, and whispered against his chest, "The world rejected me, but we will make them kneel." The bond flared one last time, brilliant and eternal, as the Alpha King and the Omega-turned Queen faced the horizon together. They had survived betrayal, defied fate, and claimed the power that was always theirs. The Queen the world rejected had risen. And now, nothing could stand in her way.